Hi, this is Gayle
And
with
Bonaparte.
BERNINA of Naperville, and it's Footloose Friday. And Bonaparte, he's super excited. I mean, he knows that I'm making something for him, and he's just very eager. So today's topic is the number 59C and the number 60C double cording feet. Now, these can be used for surface embellishment, they can be used for heavier piping, they can be used for double welting, and all different sorts of uses. So I'm going to take you through practicing on our pennant shape with some surface embellishment. Then we'll go into piping, and then we're going to make this super cute frisbee for Bones. Now, he is not exactly what I would call a frisbee dog, but we can give it a try. So let's go over to our presentation deck. Now, don't forget, the presentation deck will be emailed to you if you sign up for our Footloose Friday. And you can sign up for past episodes, you can sign up for this one as well. And what our presentation deck gives you is either a pattern, lots of links to other tutorials to help you really learn how to use the different feet. But the thing that people like the most is the discount. And this month we are doing 25% off the 59C, the 60C, and the circular embroidery attachment. All right, I'm going to shut up. Let's get to it. For many months in a lot of these Footloose Friday projects, I have created a template, and you just simply click to download it, and then you're going to tape it together, and that gives you the size and everything that you need for your foundation to create whatever it is we do each month. And this month, like I mentioned, it's all about the number 59C and 60C foot, so we're going to embellish it. Now, you might have just stumbled upon this video on our YouTube channel, and that's fine. But if you want to go back to it, sometimes, it can get lost in like all of the different videos. So if you decide to join us for our Footloose Friday, simply look at the presentation deck that you're going to get emailed to you when you pay for our Footloose Friday, and then you'll have a link right to the video that you're watching now. So we are going to cover doing embellishment with our bulky piping feet, or rather the double cording feet. You can use this application for pillows, you can use it in some clothing, home deck, and other sorts of things. But we're going to start with embellishing. And why is this a special foot for sewing over heavy cord? Well, it starts with the way that they're designed. And I've tried to take some up close pictures of the feet so that you can see what's going on here. They're designed to ride over two cords side by side. They have two tunnels on the bottom of the sole to hold the cords in place for stitching. Now, these feet are coated, and this is my disclaimer. I'm using them on my CAFE 475 machine, which has 5 millimeter capability and genuinely does not take coated feet. And I'm also going to be using these on the 990. And the only difference is when the 59C or the 60C are on your 990, you're just going to be able to make your width wider than 5.5 millimeters. The tunnel size is smaller on the 59C than on the 60C, and you can see the bottom of them there. So if you're curious, foot number 59C is going to yield a cord about 4 to 6 millimeters, which is about a quarter of an inch, and foot 60C yields a cord 7 to 8 millimeters in diameter, and that's maybe a third of an inch, something like that. And so we're going to play around a little bit as we get into this, but essentially, I'm going to be working with just some linen fabric from my stash. I have it stabilized with an interfacing called fusible woven. It comes on a roll. You can buy it by the yard, however you want to do it. It's also known as SF101, which is a Pellon product. And then as far as cutting for the samples, well, we're going to cut two of the pennant template of our interfaced linen. We're also going to cut some of the linen for the casing, and then we're going to cut two practice piping casings that are 2.5 inches on the bias. The cording that we're playing around with, I'm using some bulky yarns, but I have 1/4 inch cording, which is it's a little bit thinner. It's the piping that I'm using with my 59C foot. But then there's also this like 7/16 inch cording, which is actually cloth clothesline. I'm going to be using that with the 60C foot. And then any kind of thread to match your fibers. I've got like this lovely greenish gray thread that I'm using. I think it blends well enough for what we're working with and the fabrics that I chose for this time. When I make the pennant, I put a heavyweight stabilizer in there just so it has some oomph to it. And then, of course, you're going to need a rotary cutter, mat, and rulers to cut things out, and any new style Bernina sewing machine. And like I mentioned, we're using the Bernina 990 and the Bernina 475. Our machine supplies, apart from a needle, I recommend a 90 microtex needle for this project. And then if you stay tuned to our last example project inspiration fun thing, you're going to need a circular embroidery attachment if you would like to make your life a little bit easier. I mentioned that, hey, the cool reason to sign up for our club is really so you can get the discount on the merch, right? And we always discount our featured feet for our Footloose Friday. And we have the bonus one, which is our circular embroidery attachment. So this month it's 25% off 59C, 60C, and the circular embroidery attachment. When you use the code you get in your email, it's embedded in this presentation deck like you see here. You just use that at checkout and it will take that 25% off those 3 items. And you can buy just the 59C or just the 60C or just the circular embroidery attachment or any combination thereof. Okay, so now that we've gotten all of that good stuff out of the way, let's actually get over to the drawing board and play with some stuff. Rather than cutting my fabric before I get started with the embellishing, I'm taking my template that I've trimmed perfectly on the line and I'm tracing it with a water-soluble pen. And this way I can, I'm not going to stitch more yarn down than I need to. And then I also just have like a little guideline for when I place my stitches. So once I trace the entire triangle, I'm going to pull that away and find the center. And then I'm going to mark the center of this pennant triangle. And the center line is where I'm going to get started with stitching. And I'm going to keep it simple and just kind of experiment on this piece without really having an agenda because I'm going to use this as an example to show you the various different stitches and the different ways that you can sew 2 yarns down at the same time. So with choosing the yarn, this first yarn is bulky, but it's still thin enough to fit under that 59C foot. So I can use that foot for that one. Then I have this other one, and you can see that is totally chunky. It doesn't even fit through one channel now. Maybe if I twist it up a lot, it will fit under there. But as I stitch, I'm going to have to make sure that I'm twisting the yarn as I sew. But this one has other possibilities, so we're going to hold on to this one for later. The best option in my little scrap bin here is this loosely twisted yarn that fits perfectly under the 60C foot. It's variegated. I kind of like the way it feels. So I'm going to work with this one and do some of the experimenting with this fiber. So I'm working over 2 yarns at the same time. So I'm just going to fold them and line them up with that center registration line that I drew. And I could go 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 across this piece, or I could start sewing 2 in the middle and then keep adding a yarn on each side. So over here on my Bernina 475, I could choose a lot of different stitches, and they're called rampart stitches that we want. And the most popular one of those is stitch number 12. And it's stitch number 12 no matter what Bernina you have in the new line. And you can see that it's kind of center justified, and then it'll take a little bite on the right, then it takes a little bite on the left, and so forth. And how you adjust this stitch is dependent on how much of the thread you want to see and all of that. So I will use this stitch eventually, maybe on my 990, but I'm going to, for the 475, I want to go down to the quilting stitches, which is represented by this little checkerboard icon. And I am looking for 1332, which is the feather stitch. And as we scroll through here, you can also see that 1313, 1314 kind of have a center justification and swing out on either side as well. And even some of these, although these stitches are a little bit bolder, so they're cool if you want to actually see the stitches. But if you want them to be a little bit hidden, stitch number 1332, this feather stitch will work as well. So let's use 1332, needle in the center position, and our default settings. And I'm just going to put the two cords under the foot. I'm using 60C on this 475. Now the 475 doesn't have foot recognition, so I can just put that foot on there. And now as the needle goes down through the middle, it's stitching on just the linen fabric. But then when the needle swings right, it grabs the cording on the right. And when the needle swings left, it grabs the cording on the left. And it's a repetitive process to do this. And now we're looking at the back side here, and to see that they were really stitched together, camouflage. There's the back side. You can see that it is indeed a feather stitch. But now what's going to happen is we're in a little tricky situation here as we go on another pass. So now this one, we're actually stitching a piece of the bulky yarn that has not been stitched down, but then we're stitching it to something that has been stitched down. And so you're going to see as we go down this line that something is happening here where it is allowing the stitch to present. And really what's happening is, as I'm guiding this through, I'm a little cautious and I feel like I'm shoving the yarn a little bit too close to the other yarn. And so it's creating, instead of these channels, it's creating more of a solid surface, and therefore it's making the feather stitch be pronounced. And that's okay, because this is an example and I kind of like the texture this has created, but you can see, definitely you can see the stitches on that second pass. And it could also be that that side was a little bit more twisted. The actual fibers of the yarn were more twisted. So if I rearrange this piece and as I stitch, if I'm mindful that my yarn isn't being twisted as I stitch or isn't wound as tightly and so forth, I can start down this edge. I also need to remember that it's okay to let the foot feed the fibers because that's what it's designed to do. And sometimes overcompensating is also not good. So just kind of be mindful of how you're feeding it through and the technique. And are you pushing the fabric through the machine? Are you pulling it? Are you wiggling it? Are you doing weird things? That can affect the way that this stitches. So this time, going back again, I'm making sure that my yarn isn't twisted. And I'm making sure that I don't butt the yarn up or overcompensate with it. I am vigilant that it's lining up nicely, but I am not pulling on the yarn and I'm not oversteering, rather. And you can see the difference in that pass. Yes, we can still see the stitches, but also as I go down this other direction and lift my needle and push my yarn over to the left, that stitching is going to be hidden. So now you can see that I've switched to my 990, and this time I am using the Rampart stitch, the one that normally we use for gathering over double cord. But this one, I can adjust the width, I can adjust the length, so I can really hide those stitches. And, this is just quite repetitive to do this. Now, I also wanted to take an opportunity to kind of play around with this as well. So I picked a couple of other stitches
there's my rampart stitch in there. See that? You can see how hidden that is. But, maybe we don't want it to be hidden. I mean, this is pretty cute, but maybe you want to create a little bit more texture. So there is another ladder stitch. It is stitch 1313. And this one is going to flatten the yarn down a little bit just because it is set a little bit wider. I think I adjusted the width of this one to about 8 millimeters wide. So you'll see as I finish stitching this out that it really did give you a decorative stitch look on the yarn rather than an invisible stitch just to hold the yarn down. And I know we've talked a lot about these stitches that are double-sided with like a straight line down the middle and then it swings to the right and the left. But it's also possible to use one of our satin stitches. And I just, pretty much did stitch number 407 with the default settings and stitch that down just to see what kind of texture that would be creating. And I kind of liked it too. It just depends on what kind of look you're going for. But just, by playing around with this and doing this, I really am just giving you permission to play. And you can just kind of mix it up with what you want to do. And, hey, I made a little mistakes along the way. So let's take a moment and have a look at, well, how you can improvise.
So as I was twisting and pivoting and everything, my yarn started to really twist tightly. So I have a gap here. So if that happens, we could always fill something in here. But what I'm doing now is I'm just being mindful to untwist a little bit so I still get the fluffy bit of this texture. So, whenever we do these things, this is our, Footloose Friday. I mean, we make these pennants and it's just a little sample for different ideas more than something that goes in a museum, right? Just for fun, why don't we try our orange thinner thread with our 59C. Right now, we've been doing all the work with the 60C, and this time I'm not going to worry about really straddling and catching both yarns. I'm just covering my gaps, and I'm picking contrasting color to make it look like I meant to do that. Stitch number 1309, which is a blanket stitch. And we can elongate it and lengthen it and move the needle position on all sorts of things there. See that? That might be too wide. Let's make it a little bit thinner. Go down to maybe 2.6. And now let's make it a little bit longer just so it's more invisible. Look at that. Totally filled in the gap. Let's try that again over here. And this is just happy playtime. We're just embellishing. Don't have any preconceived ideas of what your piece is supposed to look like. If you have texture where you've experimented with different stitches, I think it kind of gives it a nice look. And then the fibers are kind of sticking on my foot, so I have to be mindful of that too. And then I noticed I have another little place here where it's just a little bit of a gap there. So I'm gonna grab another piece of yarn. And I showed you this chunky stuff earlier, but what if we didn't try to twist it into submission there and we just untwisted it? Look at that. Now look, we have 1, 2, 3, we have 4 strands where we thought we had one. So I'm going to use this with that same blanket stitch. This might be a case where we need to retwist it just a little bit, but I'm going to do this one right next to my decorative stitch one there. There we go. And once again, I'm going to twist this one so it's a little bit tighter as we go down. I think that's really cool looking. And it's really soft.
So our little sample for the pennant is complete. I mean, I think it looks kind of cool. And if you wanted to finish this up, of course, you saw me trace this template here, but all you would have to do then is take another piece of our linen, and we're just going to cut out a shape from this to put on the back side. So I cut out a backing, and then I also cut the pennant shape from my embellished piece, and then I'm holding it together with some 505 spray. And then we're just going to finish the pennant with a zigzag on each edge. I can use my bulky overlock foot for that. Some of my extra fiber here and cover those little raw edges like so. So once it gets its casing on there, we'll have a perfect little pennant. When I think of doing cording feet, I actually think of piping. Now, this is a pre-made piping. It's got kind of a coil, decorative coil there, and tape. And this is meant to look like, you know, home dec item and the like. I did this when I made a pillow with a invisible zipper last month or a couple months ago. Oh my gosh, the time goes by. But anyway, so this is something appropriate in size and everything to our number 59 C foot. This, which is like a clothesline cotton cord, this is more appropriate for the number 60C. Now, this is not pretty or to my aesthetic, right? So I am going to wrap this and make my own piping that will go over this cord. Now, you might have seen a video that we had a while back when we talked about these double cord feet, 59C and 60C, and we did rope bowls. You can do rope bowls with this if you like, but sometimes I just prefer a flat foot to do it. But I really recommend that you give it a try and do some experimenting. And in the presentation deck, I have given you a link to that double cord bowl video that I made. So, but let's go over to the machine. I'm going to put foot number 60 on here, and this time we're just going to use a regular straight stitch.
So the important thing, if we were doing this for a pillow or what have you, I typically would make my cord just like you see me doing now. And I wouldn't have my needle all the way to the edge. I would have it maybe 2 or 3 clicks to the right. And this is because as we sew this on, we want to be getting closer and closer and closer to that cord to keep it tight. But we would just simply feed this right under that channel. And now if we look really close, for this application, I can tell you right now that 3 notches to the right is too close. So I'm going to move this in a couple notches. There we go. So this is good for our first pass.
So then, once your piece is made, you can trim the seam allowance down to whatever you prefer, 5/8 if you're an apparel sewer and used to that, or you can do 1/2 inch or whatever. But then we're going to line that up, raw edges together on whatever it is that you want to add the welting to, and we can stitch.
And this time we are stitching with our needle 1 notch closer. So I'm moving that to the left, and you can see that my needle is going to be just on the left side of that first stitch. And then you can also see there's my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance.
And then here we are, and a piped edge. In home deck, there is a process known as double welting. And basically what that is it's cording and then other cording. So for instance, we might have something like this where we stitch and then we're going to insert another piece. So let's first take this piece and do one of our passes. So I have this lapped over, this is 2.5-inch bias, and I have this lapped over about 1/4 of an inch.
And then as we're stitching this, we're getting that little casing just wrapped over, just like so. And I want you to set up your stitch at 6 millimeters long in this case, because this is just a basting stitch to hold things on there to make it a little bit easier for you to manage. Now, I do want to warn you, when I filmed this video, I had not elongated my stitch, but you're going to remember to do that, right? And then once you get this stitched all the way down your piece, we're going to take it back to the design table where we're going to insert our other piece of cording. And we're going to put it just below that casing that you just created, and we're wrapping this one up to the top. And don't forget to set your stitch length back to about 3 millimeters in length for this last pass. We are working upside down, but our raw edge is going to be covered in whatever this would go on. We're just going to stitch down this middle, and once you've gone down the middle, you're going to remove your basting stitch from the previous casing, and then you've got your trim. Super easy.
So here's our double welting. That's it on the back side. It's okay that it has a raw edge because typically this is tacked into place with either furniture tacks or with a stapler. And then we cut it on the bias so that, you know, it can curve around the different shapes and things like that of your furniture. So you can see I have some cute little vinyl looking fabric pieces here. And as I mentioned, we're going to make Bonaparte a frisbee. But first, I took a 12.5-inch square. This is Alexander Henry fabric, and I added some vinyl to it. So let's go over to the ironing board and I'll show you how at least I coated this fabric.
So I'm using this heat and bond vinyl because Bonaparte's frisbee has to be waterproof and drool proof, right? And this stuff is pretty easy to use. You have to pre-wash your fabric because if the fabric shrinks, the vinyl coating is going to look really weird. So pre-washed fabric, and then you're going to preheat your iron to medium heat and no steam. And also for my Laura Star, I would recommend, if you want to put that protective piece on it, it will lower the temperature, but it'll also prevent your iron from getting all ooky and dirty. Then once you do that, you're going to peel the protective paper away from the vinyl and put the sticky side down on the right side of your fabric. Then you're going to press and hold the iron on the protective paper for about 8 seconds, and then you just repeat until the entire surface is laminated. And then I also recommend that you flip the piece over after you have done the vinyl side, just to make sure, and you put the paper down. And then you're going to iron it onto the wrong side just to make sure everything is nice and adhered.
Now, once that's done, this is 12.5-inch square, and this was about 12.5 inches by 14. And all I've done is cut it in half and stitched a 1/4-inch seam here. This is going to be the hole that I leave to turn my frisbee because frisbees are round and I don't like leaving an opening on the edge of something round because then it's not round, at least when I try to do it anyway. So we're going to put this cording in the end of the frisbee and it's going to form like a little circle, right? But we need something that will make a perfect circle. And of course, yes, I could take a dinner plate, I could do something, I could find a circular template, whatever, but I have just the perfect thing that works awesome every time. And it is my circular embroidery attachment. Now, the circular embroidery attachment can work with almost any foot on your Bernina, and it also is just so cool because we can do about a 2.5 inch circle all the way up to something almost 12 inches, like 11 3/4, I think is the largest size. And so this has a little protective rubber piece on it, but this is sharp, sharp and pokey, this guy, okay? So what we're doing when we make a circle is we are picking the radius, and remember, the size of your circle, the diameter is 2 times the radius. And so if I want to make like close to a 12-inch size frisbee, I'm going to have my circular embroidery attachment moved as far away from the needle as possible. Also, with the circular embroidery attachment, you get a screwdriver and a screw that will attach to your machine, and it will fit every Bernina from the beginning of time. So even my 990, and yes, your vintage Berninas as well.
So when you attach this, you can notice that if I try to put this hole and this hole there, I'm covering my needle area right here. So let's take off this foot. See that? So the hole that we're going to be using is the hole on the left, right there. And then this is the screwdriver. Now, you could also put this hole, turn it around and put it here, but I just don't like doing it that way, so I have it set up like this. And now we're going to use the number 59C foot, and we're going to find the center of our work.
So like I mentioned to you, this is the it's 12.5 inches square. So we're going to 12.5 inches is 6 1/4. And 6 1/4 from this edge here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to first place this piece right side up. This is important. And we're going to make sure we keep our little pokey sharp thing right there in that piece, but we're first going to attach our cording. And we're going to put our cording on with the tape to the outside like that. Now, bear with me because I'm also going to have to use a little bit of tearaway stabilizer under here because when you use a circular embroidery attachment, you have to have a little bit more oomph. And I'm adhering this with a little bit of 505 adhesive spray, and I cut my stabilizer 12.5 inches as well. All right, let's go over to the machine.
Okay, so remember my pokey thing? That's going right on our intersection, which is right here. And it's going to leave a hole. And now we're going to take our cord, tape side to the right, slip it under the foot. It doesn't matter where we start. And I want to kind of keep my needle one notch to the right. And notice that I put the little rubber nubbin back on there like so. And now we're going to gently sew this piping into position. And now remember, at the end of the day, I know Bonaparte is really finicky, but this is a dog frisbee. This isn't a beret. Okay, so as I approach this, I want to cut my pieces exactly butt to butt, and I made a little piece to connect these two together. Now, you would probably pick black if you were doing black piping, but I just picked a piece of that linen that we used earlier, or you could use a piece of your cute little dog fabric. But I'm just going to connect them by slipping this over and slipping this over like so, and covering this up just like that. No big deal. Okay, so once this is on, there's a couple ways that we can do it. Now, one way is to take this off and put this piece underneath. That might be the easiest way for some of you, and that way you're actually being able to stitch and see the stitching right here, right? However, I'm going to go ahead and just cut. We can also put our piece on like so, and then just make sure, if we make sure everything's covered nicely. And I'm going to do it like this just so I'm not adding more bulk to that end over there. So once you kind of get that into position and you kind of like it, we can put the poker over there, cover the hole, and now we're going to go around again. And we know it's going to be stitched exactly the same way because we haven't moved our radius. Another thing that might help you a little bit before we get started on this second row is if we make our little stress cuts here, just so it'll lay flatter as we try to stitch. Be careful not to cut into the stitching. And I'm going to lift the presser foot so I can spin this around a little bit.
And I'm using my hands to really stabilize this top layer. It does tend to feel like it's getting a little puckery. So just make sure that you apply even pressure and you spread that fabric out nicely, especially as you approach the intersection where you started. I'm cutting about 1/2 inch seam allowance around our piece. And you want to be careful not to cut that piping, of course. And now what we're going to do is first remove our stabilizer back here. So I'm going to score this. There we go. And now let's turn it inside out. Okay, so I'm gonna, before we stitch anything or whatever, I'm just gonna take it back to the iron and get some of the crinkles out, and I'm gonna use our protective paper that we used when we applied our vinyl.
So now all we need to do is just a little bit of stitching right through here by hand to hold this little opening closed.
Did I say by hand? I must have had a stroke. Oh my gosh, no way. It's a dog toy. I just did a tiny little seam there on the 990 and I just grabbed the 37 foot that I've had for close to 30 years and now it's done. I did have to give it another pressing because it got kind of crinkly when it went under the machine, but it's going to get more crinkly in about a hot minute. Bonaparte, Bonaparte, are you ready? Are you ready to try out your new toy that I made you?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be, Mom. You're not throwing it right. Oh my God, you threw it over the fence. Mom, I'm over here.
Bring it back.
Maybe you need to do some wrist exercises to throw that thing. Oh, brother. Jeez.
Are you going to give this a try? Are you going to maybe make something else? Now, you know you don't have to make a frisbee. You could make a circular pillow. You could do all kinds of fun things with this. But what I really hope is that you found something that you didn't know from this tutorial. And if you want to check out some of our other videos, it's pretty easy. You just hop on over to youtube.com/BERNINA of Naperville, and there you can like, comment, and subscribe. Dog training optional.